Hello and welcome to Off the Shelf Reviews.
I'm pretty sure Gary's been watching me while I sleep.
And I'm Gary. And today we're going to review and discuss The Gate, which came out in 1987 from director Tibor Takács. Also written by Michael Nankin. Iain, will you give us the synopsis for The Gate?
Well, the story follows Glenn, played by a very young Stephen Dorff. Glenn's been having some pretty vivid nightmares recently and has found a hole in his back garden. Glenn's friend Terry has found evidence in one of his heavy metal rock albums that the hole in his back garden is actually a gateway to hell, and if they can avoid putting blood and human sacrifices into the hole, they'll not have an invasion from hell happening in Glenn's house. Obviously, blood and human sacrifices do end up going into the hole, and Glenn, his sister and his friend have to band together to stop the gateway from hell from destroying the world.
This is a film that I've championed from my childhood as one of the earliest horror movies that I'd seen that was sort of age appropriate. It was a PG-13 horror movie.
Yeah.
There's a lot of great imagery in this film which has just stuck with me and that I've just seen in future horror movies or in more adult horror movies. And I love the fact that the script for this film from Michael Nankin, who was originally intending to direct the film, he wrote it when he was in a very dark place. A film that he was also lined up to direct. The funding never came through. His wife had just left him.
Ouch.
And so he wrote a script which had a couple of children, raise evil out of the ground, which would then go on a mass killing spree, killing all the neighbours and townspeople. And it was a very dark film, to which not many people survived. But the company that he was writing the script for went, that's great, we're going to make this film. But then they sold it to a Canadian company, and then that was when Michael Nankin found out that he was not going to be directing his movie The Gate, that another artist was going to be doing it, and they weren't going to do the dark tone, that it was going to be a family movie. So coming from this dark place, you can imagine he was pretty frustrated. But what I like from the director is that he went, okay, I didn't write the script. This is your idea. Come and work with me on this film. And so the director and the writer got to work with each other.
Yeah.
And they would continue to work with each other into the sequel.
Yeah, this is the first time I'd ever watched this film. And yeah, Gary has pretty much just gone on about this film for like the whole fucking time I've known him. And we tried to watch it like years and years and years ago, but I ended up falling asleep. So when he said, we're going to review The Gate, I was like, oh, finally, I get to sit down and watch it. And the first thing that jumps out to me is the fact that Glenn seems to live in the Poltergeist E.T. neighborhood.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm just like, well, this is a bad start because, a lot of bad shit happens in this neighborhood. But I don't think it's obviously the same set, but it obviously,
they shot this in Canada, so.
Yeah, so, America, Canada, those suburban neighborhoods kind of all look the same to me. But it all starts kind of creepy because Glenn comes home to find his house completely empty. There's signs of people being there, but they've gone now. He goes out into his back garden and he climbs into his tree house, and then the tree is hit by lightning and collapses. Now, I will admit this is kind of where I realised that I was a little bit too old for this film because the tree safely falls, shall we say. It doesn't dramatically fall. It safely falls to the ground. And Glenn wakes up to notice that there's workmen getting rid of the tree from his back garden, which has collapsed. So I'm like, oh, okay, so it wasn't a dream. It was kind of like a premonition, And underneath the tree is what would become the hole, which would be the gate to hell. It's a very slow build-up.
I don't know. I really like the dreamlike nature of the entire film, which all comes from that opening sequence, which really sets the atmosphere and the tone for the rest of the film.
like I said, the directors, they did Gate and Gate 2, and then went off to do a lot of TV. And I kind of felt as the film went on, it was like I was watching an elongated episode of The Outer Limits or The Twilight Zone. You know, some freaky stuff happening. The kid stuff was good. I enjoyed that. You know, the relationship between Glenn and his sister Al, who's obviously a lot older than him, and she's going through her usual teenage stuff of hooking up with her friends and going shopping. But, you know, you could tell that her and Glenn have had this long relationship of being brother and sister and building rockets with each other and playing and stuff. But now she's spending more time off with her friends. Glenn's spending more time with his friend Terry, who we find out has recently lost his mum, and his dad doesn't seem to be home. So Terry, I wouldn't say he's acting out or lashing out. He just ends up doing bad stuff, and Glenn ends up getting in trouble for it.
Well, I love the fact that the entire cast in this film are all pretty much unknowns.
Yeah.
It's only really Stephen Dorff who we would recognise in Blade, playing Deacon Frost.
But that would be like many years later.
And of course, Stephen Dorff had not really had that big of a film career, but I think he was great even as a child actor in this. And you can easily identify with him and his sister and his friend. They're all very relatable characters. They're all good characters, and that came from the script again, where the script was written based on real characters. The writer's best friend Terry from childhood, the first thing that his friend Terry told him was that a construction worker died in his house. And so all of these real events that occurred all went into the script, which just helps make it feel very natural and very real.
Yeah, but for me, the weakness starts to come in when you start getting all the other teenagers start coming in. You know, Al's friends start coming over.
The Lee sisters.
Yeah.
Buzz off, clown face.
Ooh. Don't you have to go upstairs and change your pampers or something?
Don't you have to go and join the circus?
Hey, you guys, come on.
And, you know, and I know that they're there to be part of Al's, you know, kind of story. You know, she's wanting to hang out with these, but obviously she's got to look after her brother while her parents are away. But the fact of the matter is, when you've watched a lot of horror movies, I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing with this movie, but when you've watched a lot of horror movies, you see teens turn up and you're expecting them to all start dying. In this one, they don't, but you kind of want them to because they're so fucking annoying. You know, I don't know if it's the fact that they're 80s teens with the jumpers and the fucking, you know, bright baubles in their hair and the makeup.
And something about Mary haircuts.
Yeah, and you're just like, I just want something to come along and start killing you. Nothing does. And that's the crazy thing about this film, is that first time seeing it, 35 years old, I found it hard to relate to Stephen Dorff because obviously I'm not a 12-year-old boy.
Well, yeah, but you can still kind of have the nostalgia of your own childhood.
I got that, and like I said, it's weird because I at parts I found it weak because there was a slow build up. You know, I was finding it hard to relate to some of the characters. Some of the stuff with the later teens would become annoying, but what I did find that was really good and overbalanced it to make the film enjoyable, I suppose, was the camera work, you know, the suspenseful build-up, the fact that a lot of the situations with Glenn and then later on with Al and Terry, I did generally feel not terrified, but quite scared. And maybe it was because this is Stephen Dorff, you know, and I know Stephen Dorff can act, so because I know that and see him as, like you said, as a successful young actor, he makes what I'm seeing believable.
Yeah, I think all of their reactions are quite normal and genuine considering the circumstances. Like when the sister comes out and they've got the hole there and she's like, "You dig up that hole again?" And they're like, "Well, actually, we accidentally opened a gateway to another dimension and now we're trying to seal it using verses from a record album."
Yeah.
And it's like,
we accidentally summoned demons who used to rule the universe to come and take over the world.
Yeah, we found out about it from one of Terry's albums.
Well, they're gone now.
Okay.
Yeah, that's it. The script is believable from the kids' point of view, but just like the adults, you're standing there like, I'm not completely buying this. But you followed Glenn, so you've seen all this creepy stuff happen. They keep finding the geodes.
That's right, yeah.
And then they open the geode in his bedroom and it cracks open and there's all these weird lights flashing out of it. And I'm looking at it like, that's not normal. I've seen geodes. They don't flash like that. It's something weird.
They're not usually that big either.
Yeah.
But some strange sort of writing has left itself on a sort of Etch-a-Sketch.
Yeah, that was...
And it kind of reminds me of The Evil Dead. It's like, oh look, there's some strange writing. Let's read it aloud.
That's it.
Oops, I just opened a gateway to hell.
Aka Kuto Ala Ita.
I got that. He's just like, oh, this is weird. I don't know what it says, but I'm just going to read it out. And I literally wrote in my notes, like, never say the words. Ever. Mum and Dad, we don't see a lot in this film.
Well, in one draft of the script, there was actually going to be no adults in the entire film. But they thought it was good just to have them at the beginning, just to set up this family unit.
Yeah, and I mean, that kind of works. It's then where they turn around and they're like, well, we're going away for 3 days and obviously we need to get a babysitter in for you. And I was like, no, I'm an adult. I can take care of them. And you see the parents kind of drive away. Oh, Glenn, you're grounded. You're not allowed to leave after some of the destructive stuff you've done with your friend Terry. You're not allowed to leave, and we'll be back in 3 days. And as soon as they're gone, it's a party. There's just people walking around, and it kind of made me feel relatable to Al there, because you've got all these people walking around, kind of trashing her house, because they're having a party, and she's trying to clean it up because she doesn't want her parents to find out. So I was relatable because when you have a party, you're always the one fucking tidying up after people. But it brought me to one of my favourite characters of the film, Angus the dog. He is a party animal, pun intended, actually, because he starts just wandering around this party. And what does it Glenn keep saying? He's 97 years old in dog years. Mm-hmm. I'm like, give that dog a beer. Give him some snacks. Let's take him off. And I thought that was quite cool as well, because you expect with teenage parties in horror movies them all to be doing drugs and having sex and drinking. This party was quite tame in that respect.
Yeah. They kind of sit around and start telling each other ghost stories.
Yeah.
And then they decided it'd be a fun idea to try and levitate one of them, which doesn't really work until Glenn and Terry are trying to sneak out the door, and they get called in, and they decide they're going to levitate Glenn instead.
Yeah.
And it works.
Rise. Hey! Help!
How did that work? For real? Why he's floating and he grabs hold of the light and rips it off the wall?
Yeah.
And then goes running out crying, and you're like, that actually worked.
Yeah, I was kind of like, your parents haven't been gone for 12 hours, you've already destroyed the lamps. I hope you know how to plaster, because they're going to be pissed when they come back. Towards the end of the film, they're going to be more pissed.
So, there's a really nice moment when Al and Terry come up to Glenn and they convince him, well, they tell him that, crying in front of people is no big deal, really. And they explain similar situations that they were embarrassed about. I like that, because it just strengthens the bond between the three of them. There's real love there.
That's what I liked as well, because as much as Al, like I said, was wanting to spend all of her time with her friends, she really cares for her brother. So when the three of them are there, and she's like, oh, remember when so and so pulled my trousers down in class, and Terry's like, remember when I puked at the end of running? You're just like, right, they're all on the same even keel now. No one is better than the other. And I started to kind of like Terry a lot at this point, because he's got a bit of destructive tendencies about him. And at first I thought he was bullying Glenn. But then I realised that actually he needs a friend just as much as Glenn needs.
Yeah.
But nighttime comes and Terry's staying over. And he gets up to go to the toilet. I got a bit confused because you see Al get into bed and she's looking at herself in the mirror. And Glenn goes to sleep, and I thought Terry was going to go sneak into her room. I don't know. I've seen far too many movies in my time. I thought he was going to try it on with the sister. But he does. He just goes off to the toilet, and then he comes back. And you got this glimpse of Angus. And obviously, we've already been told that Angus is quite old. And Angus didn't look healthy at this point when Terry went to the toilet. But he comes back out and his mum appears at the doorway.
All angelic, like, white dress sort of blowing in the wind, and she's calling out to him.
Yeah.
And so, as you imagine a child would, he runs to his mother and they embrace and the camera's swirling around and you're like, what the hell? Obviously, we know that there's a demonic gate in the backyard and strange occurrences are happening.
Well, it keeps flicking back, doesn't it? Because it keeps flicking to Glenn, who's woken up, and he's seeing creepy stuff move through the walls. And so the suspense and the scariness is building up because what Terry's hugging is not his mum, because you know that she's dead, and obviously she's way too angelic. And then you're seeing all this stuff creeping through the walls, and you're just like,
it's a case of the frighteners.
Yeah, there's an evil presence building up. And then he reveals that it's Angus, and he's been dancing with Angus, and Al and Glenn both come out, and everybody seems pretty upset. And I was not massively in tears, but I was just like, I've just got used to the dog, and now the dog's died. Glenn, obviously, the next morning, tries to convince Al that they should call the parents. We should tell them what's going on. The levitation, you all saw it last night. Stop pretending. We need to deal with Angus as well. So Al convinces her friend to take the dog to a pet shelter while she goes off to the beach and leaves 12-year-old Glenn completely on his own.
And so Glenn and Terry start investigating what's going on, and Terry's like, look at this album.
Yeah.
And in here you can see there's the geodes, and in here there's the levitation, and in here it mentions about a sacrifice. But the sacrifice is only ever really complete if the sacrifice is thrown into the pit, into the gate. And then we cut back to the guy who's taking the dog to the vets, and it's closed.
Yeah.
And he brings it back to the house. And of course, Glenn and Terry are at Terry's house. And he sees the garden. And he's like, oh, look, there's a great big hole in the ground. I'll drop the corpse of the dog in there.
Yeah, just throw it in there.
So then, Terry and Glenn are like, okay, we've got this spell, we've got a ritual now, we're going to go in. And this is one of my favourite parts, and again, one of the most memorable parts in the film. And this was the film that introduced the concept to me. Was playing records in reverse and hearing demonic words or phrases. But in this case, it's actually the passages needed in order to close the gate.
Yeah.
So they write them down and they go there and they do this performance. They read out the verse and nothing really happens. And so Glenn's just like, well, just do it again. And they read it a couple of times. Like, they're satisfied. The sister comes out. They pull back the door.
Yeah.
And the hole is closed. And they close it back down and they go away. And I love the shot later on where it's not really necessary, but you see the lock on the broken hatch sort of just kind of open itself. It's like
that's just a piece of wood on top that you could just lift up and throw. And somebody's like, just undo the latch so we can open up.
It's funny, but it gets the message across that, the gate's not closed.
Who's that?
Well, there's one way to find out. Demons aren't gonna ring the doorbell.
Worse. Lee sisters.
The Lee sisters come over, everyone's in the house, and then things start to play up again.
Yeah. I mean, the moths had been a heavy influence from the start of the film. Terry had mentioned about how long moths could live without air, which I thought was a bit harsh. Glenn's been watching them in the jar, and watching them die or come back, and strange imagery started to happen. And then he wakes up and there's a fucking shit ton of moths on his window, and they break the window. And you're just like, right, okay, that's not normal. But it builds up then to Al coming in to deal with the glass, and her trying to wake Terry up, who's supposed to be asleep in the bed. And Terry, I love that bit where Terry comes behind them and is just like, hey guys, what are you doing? And they pull back the quilt and realise it's Angus, the dead dog.
But this time he's got a bloodied mouth and there's all the smoke coming off of it. And it, you know, the shot's only there for a few seconds.
Yeah.
But it's graphic enough to make you go,
What the hell? You know, arms start coming out of the bed.
That's one, again, as a child, one of the scariest and most frightening things you can think of is the creature under the bed. And those arms.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
It's not even like there's two. I think there's like 3 or 4 arms that come out. I
and
don't
then
know if it's the
Stretch
same
Armstrong
creature.
is down there too.
Yeah. Yeah. So the kids obviously come running out of the bedroom, run all the way downstairs and want to escape out the front door. And luckily, or unluckily, Mum and Dad are there. So Glenn goes running up to give his dad a hug.
And, you know, you're just like, oh, brilliant. At least the adults are back. Maybe they'll be able to help with the situation. But at the same time, in your mind, you're like, we've already seen Terry's mum come back.
Yeah.
And, you know, with the strange sort of smoke and lighting on these parents, you're just like,
Something's up.
you've been bad.
You've been bad.
It's just a great line. And, you know, you see Glenn has just been picked up by his dad, and as he's struggling, he puts his hands through his dad's face, and this milky sort of liquid just rushes at him. You're like, that's disgusting, and an amazing effect. And then the mother literally laughs her head off.
What the fuck?
So they decide to go running into the house, and the telephone rings.
Yeah.
And so the Lee sister's like, answer it! And it's her dad again just going, you've been bad! And the phone explodes and melts up the wall. It's like,
what the fuck?
so they decide they're going to have to go and investigate the gate. And they go out there, and the little minions scare them back into the house.
Oh.
And you have it's the first time you get to really see that the minions, you've seen the shadow of him on the wall at one point.
What the fuck are they? They are, I mean, I put them on the same kind of miniature effect standard as the critters, the Krites from Critters. But the critters are a hell of a lot more scarier and terrifying. But these are done really well. I kept thinking of Ray Harryhausen.
Well, it's interesting because the makeup artist, Randall William Cook, always wanted to be the next Ray Harryhausen. But he was just like, well, there already is a Ray Harryhausen, so
Yeah.
the only thing I can do is do my own thing. And he worked on with a team of other great special effects designers to come up with the monsters, or the demons. And they are the most adorable looking demons, really, in film.
Yeah.
But what I like is that these are all men in suits. It's great because they did forced perspective to make them look tiny.
Yes.
And, you know, this is a trick that was used a lot in sort of the 50s and 60s cinema, and then was massively used in the Lord of the Rings films, which, again, Randall William Cook was the special effects designer for all 3 Lord of the Rings films. And so you could really get to see his forced perspective work being utilised here, which he would just take further.
Yeah, I mean, the demons are they're not terrifying, but there are a couple of sequences where they really do stand out. I mean, there's a sequence later on where they're fighting a demon, a zombie, and the zombie collapses and then immediately just breaks into all of these demons start running around.
That is my favourite shot and possibly my favourite scene in the film. It is seamless. The way that they did it, I mean, it's a dummy that falls into the ground.
Yeah.
But what they did was they kept the camera there, and they sort of did a chalk outline on the camera as to where he fell.
Yeah.
Obviously cut, move the body out the way, and then got all of the extras, all of the demons in place, obviously in forced perspective.
Yeah.
And you can see an image here of how they set that up. And it's just seamless. It's just such a great transition, such a great cut. Now, Randall also went on to say that he wished that for just a few frames, each of the demons still had some colouring of the construction worker that fell. But still, it's, you know, regardless of just wanting to tweak it and make it look that little bit better, it's such a great moment. And the way that all of the minions sort of disperse around the room, it's just great.
Yeah, you could be mistaken to think that they are like plasticine clay figures, but like
It's because
like
of the
Gareth
weird
said,
jerky movements they have.
but they are just they're just men in suit, and for that kind of era, that special effect, it's really paid off.
I also think it's great that all of the actors that played the minions, none of them were actors, none of them were dancers, none of them were mime artists. They were just people. And so when they were put in these rubber suits, they didn't really know how to behave or what to do, and they kind of were a little bit, you could say they were a little bit dumb as to what they had to do. And that actually comes through
that plays off,
in the minions, and the way that they just stare at you. They kind of seem dumb, but at the same time, you kind of, the way that they position themselves and the way the camera's framed, you know that there's something sinister going on there.
And they've all seemed to have their own individuality, even though they look a lot alike. They all kind of do their own thing. Maybe one's a little bit fatter than the other one, or one's just a little bit taller than the other one, and that really works. I mean, we cut back obviously to the three children out in the back garden trying to seal the gate with a Bible by saying verses into it, and Terry ends up falling in. And this is one of my favorite sequences, is where the demons all start coming out, and he's kind of in shock seeing one up so close. And then they all start biting him, and there's loads of them, and you're just like, get out of there because they're going to overpower you, and he ends up having to be pulled back out by the log. And they managed to pull him out, and they managed to seal the gate. So you're just like, yay, finally!
So the Christian Bible defeated demons that existed way before Christianity was even...
Yeah, well, I think it's more of a faith kind of thing, positive faith into it. But we're not buying that. Come on, that's no way to fucking, end the movie. And that's it. The film still escalates after that. They go into house. I mean, you have a little thing with the teens, which I thought was completely bollocks. Basically, they find the Lisas hiding in a cupboard, but the Lisas have invited the boys over. Al, it's a nice little sequence where Al's just like, look, you can all just get out.
And that's when things pick up again. As I said, the construction worker who was, mentioned earlier in the film, sort of the creature in the walls.
Yeah.
Another great effect, the designer for it was like, I'm not just going to do, a decomposing character who looks like a zombie you've seen in every other movie with zombies in. He was like, I'm going to do something different. And I think that the effect on it looks great, down to the overalls. I love the effect where when he first falls out and grabs hold of Glenn, and he breathes out sort of this acrid smoke to make it look like he's been in the walls the whole time, and that he's covered in dust, and it's actually cigarette smoke that he held in his mouth to breathe out, just to give that effect, because it was the best way to do it on such a small budget. There's just no CGI in this film at all.
It starts to get really creepy because he pulls Terry into the wall, and then the wall returns. And you're just like, okay, that's not normal. So then Glenn runs up the stairs to get his sister, and they start getting chased by the demons and run into the cupboard to retrieve the shotgun that we'd seen earlier in the movie so that they can fight it off. And then all of a sudden, the zombie comes out. But just before the zombie comes out, I just remembered actually, is when Terry makes his another appearance, demonic appearance, and he's attacking Glenn and gets stabbed in the eye by a Barbie doll.
It's a pretty graphic moment for a kid's horror movie, being stabbed in the eye.
Yeah. Al gets pulled off by the zombie, and Glenn's all left on his own now and realizes that the only way to defeat the big demon that's supposed to be coming up is by using an instrument of love, which would be a rocket, the rocket that we kept hearing about throughout I think it's the Fireball. Is it the Fireball rocket?
Something like that. It's the one that his dad had confiscated from him before the film had began for damaging the side of the house.
Yeah.
And so, the love of the family, like, even though he did this damage, he loves rockets, we're not going to throw it out.
Well, it's mainly the sister, isn't it? Because he finds that note from his sister saying, happy birthday, because he was going to get one for her too. And then that big fucking giant weird looking demon thing kind of sprouts out of the hole in the middle of the house.
It's a stop motion creature and it's a huge creature.
Yeah.
And I just love all the intricate details on it. The fact that it has arms, tentacles, multiple eyes, the fact that it's breathing. Even in HD, the creature still looks great.
It's the interaction he has with Glenn, where he kind of, I think he pats him on the head.
Yeah.
You know? And Glenn ends up getting like a weird eyeball in his hand. What the fuck? You know? And it builds all the way up to Glenn, you know, finally getting hold of this rocket, firing it into the demon, and blowing up the whole fucking house. And you're just like, wow, that's it. But then you kind of get uplifted because Angus comes out kind of unharmed. Terry and Al stumble out of the cupboard and they're unharmed. And so you're like, yes, a good, happy ending. But what are we going to say to the mum and dad when they come back and realise the house is fucked?
Yeah. It is such a good ending because everyone's alive, the dog's alive, the kids are alive.
Yeah.
You know, they've stopped the pit of hell. But yeah, you know, the parents are literally on their way back, and you know, usually you expect everything to be restored and back to normal.
Yeah.
But you can still see that house is a smouldering wreck, and that film ends. And so, you know, it's only when you think about it, you're like, these kids are gonna, what's gonna happen to them? They're fucked.
How do you explain to your mum and dad, oh yeah, the house is fucked because we had to fight a gateway to hell and a huge old god demon?
Yeah.
I don't even think I'd buy that.
So, you know, there is a sequel to The Gate, which they went into production like 2 years later. Same writer, same director, same special effects, and Lewis Tripp playing Terry once more. Stephen Dorff no longer playing Glenn.
Yeah.
And interestingly, the company that made Gate and Gate 2 went bankrupt before Gate 2 was finished. And so they ended up selling the rights to it to another film company who shelved it for 2 years before finally releasing it straight on home video, which is where I eventually was able to catch it, renting it. So there was no advertising for it. And when I watched it back then, I was like, I saw it the once and I had no inclination to watch it again. Knowing I was going to be reviewing The Gate, I thought, I'll watch The Gate 2, Trespassers one more time. And I didn't make it all the way through it, I'm afraid. It doesn't stand up at all. It never even stood up to the first film at the time.
Yeah.
But, you know, if you are a real fan of The Gate, as I am, you out of curiosity, you might just want to go and watch it, because it's interesting in itself just to see the evolution of the Terry character, who has become somewhat of a Satanist, or rather a demonologist.
Yeah.
And he decides that his life has been terrible. He's being bullied. His dad has lost his airline job as an alcoholic. And his best friend has moved away.
Yeah, his mum
I wonder
died.
why. His mum had died. And so he goes back to his friend Glenn's house. And it's interesting because you see that house and it is still the same wreck that it was at the end of The Gate. And so you're like, oh, wow. So those parents came back and that family moved out the very next day.
He just moved.
And so it's like, oh, okay. So, but the gateway's still there. And so Terry decides, because my life is so shit, I'm going to use the power of the evil that's in this gate to better my life. The special effects are good.
Yeah.
The storyline, you're kind of like, Terry, you should have known better.
Yeah.
Despite how bad things are getting, you don't go to evil to try and siphon the energy to make things better. The acting in it's not so good. The characters in it not so great. It really felt like a direct-to-DVD sequel.
Yeah.
And it's a shame. But I will say for the second one, you can still enjoy it if you are a mega fan of The Gate. And if you never even heard of The Gate movies and you now watch The Gate and enjoy it, yeah, I would say maybe check out the second one. But the first Gate movie, of course I recommend it. I've never not recommended it. Even if you're an adult and you've seen all these other horror movies, go back and watch The Gate, because there are some great moments in the film, great creature effects. As I said, my favourite scene of the construction worker falling and hitting the ground, just great. And the scene with the parents come back, and when Glenn puts his hand for his father's face, and the mother laughing her head off, just great memorable moments, as well as just the child actors. They're bonding. You really feel connected to them as a family unit. watching this film, at the end, I was like, now I want a sister.
My favourite scenes, you know, they're kind of weak because, unlike Gary, you know, nostalgically, I don't have this film like imprinted in my childhood. I like Angus, the dead dog, you know, wandering around at the party, you know, trying to get a beer. I felt like I fully believed he was a dog. I really did. I really like this sequence where Terry's mum ended up coming to the door. You know, it's really creepy. It's unsettling. You know something's up. And then when it reveals that he's holding Angus, you kind of realise that the dead dog is like a model, you know. But everything's built up to the point then where you're just like, oh my God, Angus is dead. And, you know, it wasn't really your mum. And my final favourite scene is Terry versus the demons. You know, I really like the effect of the demons just walking around doing their little thing. They're not scary, really. They're kind of, adorable. But at the same time, they've got some maliciousness behind them and you just know they're up to no good. I only recommend this film if you have children who are maybe 8, 9 years old and you want them to start seeing scary horror movies. You know, there's no way you can get a 10-year-old kid to sit down or should allow a 10-year-old kid to sit down and watch Nightmare on Elm Street or Freddy Krueger or Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Well, all those films were
all of those.
All the big films in the 80s which, you know, surrounded this film.
Yeah. But, you know, you've got to start them somewhere. You know, you've got to make them realize that, yes, when you go to see a horror movie, you intend to get scared. And this film does work very well with the non-gory scariness, you know.
It's about the atmosphere and the tension that's built, yeah,
and the background. You know, Stephen Dorff works really well as a child actor, and I can imagine a lot of children getting behind him as the hero and kind of believing them to be the hero.
Yeah.
You know, Al and Terry, the three of them work really well together as a unit, and they all have their own little separate things to do in this movie. So you kind of, you know, maybe as a child you joined in with the group. Adults, though, you know, you're only really going to really enjoy this if you're a fan of old school 80s horror movies. It is a bit corny in places, and it can be a bit weak. But it's not the worst movie out there.
No. You know, interestingly, that there is a reboot of The Gate. It's been in production for about 8 years now.
Wow, okay.
And it was originally going to be in 3D as well, so Gate 3D.
Yeah.
You never guess who was attached to direct it. Alex Winters from Bill and Ted. Yeah. He's been attached to make the 3D or Gate 3D for the longest time, and you know, it was back in 2011 where he was promising that they were in pre-production and shooting should begin this year.
Yeah.
And you know, all these years later, and it still hasn't happened. Just like Bill and Ted 3, I guess.
Yeah.
But you know, there is a spark somewhere in a studio with the Gate, and people are still looking at it, and there might very well be in the future a remake of the Gate or a third movie in the series. Who knows? Now, I don't think the story's fully concluded yet.
Yeah, I think it's done.
Thanks for watching Off the Shelf Reviews.